Our first session of this final chapter is continuing in the direction of future. It's my great pleasure to introduce our moderator, Courtney Lane.
Hello, everybody. It is a pleasure to be here. My name is Courtney Lane. I have my own company. It's called Anna Kappa Clinical Research. I started at Rice in 1992 as an undergraduate. So I was here from 92 to 96 as an undergrad. I came back as a visiting student in like 1998 as a grad student. And then I came back again as a postdoc between 2003 and 2005. So for a non-faculty person, I have been coming back to Rice for a long, long time. So I really am excited to be here. One thing I wanted to share that hasn't been represented as much is the undergrad experience of a student in the DSP program. As an undergrad, my first job on campus was the office manager for CITI, which is now the Ken Kennedy Institute for something or another, and but a very important computational computer science organization. So my job was to organize Ken Kennedy's mail and his grant pieces of paper, and also to organize the Friday afternoon teas, which they should have called beers. But in that experience, I got to meet lots of not just this computer science faculty, but the electrical engineering faculty. Got really comfortable, saying hi to Sid as he walked by, saying hi to Don Johnson as he walked by. And so worked up the nerve to go to Don Johnson and ask if he would be my research advisor as a student for a summer internship. And he said, sure, but what I really need is somebody to help me right now. And I said, okay, whatever you need, I'm happy to do this. And he said, I have this entire wall of IEEE Signal Processing Society journals, and I would really like to get at least the tables of contents digitized. How well do you type? So I typed and I made like $7 an hour, but it was a great experience because I was always around, always doing things. And so you're welcome for that.
Did that all make it into IEEE Explorer?
I think so. So the really old ones are me typing on my Gateway laptop that my dad's partner's nephew gave me for some reason. Anyway, and this was in, like I said, 1993, 94, so a Gateway laptop was pretty cool. I then went on to work with Don Johnson as an undergrad, as doing neural modeling of the auditory system. Rich B. was my senior thesis advisor doing image processing. I did an internship at TI under Panos Papamichalis. Like, how cool is that, right? So just a very amazing opportunity as a student to just do some really awesome things. I went on to do my PhD at MIT, worked in the Mass Eye Infirmary, where Don Johnson did a lot of his work, but took signal processing and estimation and detection from Alan Wilsky and those folks. So really, had a kind of an amazing career academically. So then I went on, came back to Rice, did a postdoc, then went on to industry where I worked in medical devices. I was the first hire for Boston Scientific's deep brain stimulation project, so I did whatever they needed me to do. So if it was designing the specs, I wrote the specs. If it was a test plan, I wrote the test plan. Ultimately did clinical research for them and was responsible for their clinical science program for the neuromodulation devices for the entire portfolio, and then went from there to found my own company as a consultant. So now I help small companies and mid-sized companies, usually in the medical device space, often neuromodulation devices, do clinical research. So it's been an amazing career. It's just been a fun thing, and it's fun to come back and talk some math, because I don't do that so much anymore. But I am very excited to be back. Now, I want to talk about zooming forward to Rice's future. One of the things I'm very excited about Rice's future is we're getting back to the neural engineering things, which has always been my
favorite part. So I would like to now introduce some of the current Rice graduate students who will represent Rice DSP in the future. The first speaker today is Jasper Tan. Jasper.
I'm a PhD student in Rich Baranyuk's group, and I'm excited to just give us a little glimpse of the projects we're currently working on, as well as some of our visions for the next few years. The key summary is 3 thrusts: to better sense, to better understand, and to better teach. So let's get right into it. As Dr. Schaefer said, you can't have signal processing without a signal, and so we first need to sense signals out in the real world. In our lab, we are developing new and better ways of sensing by incorporating computation heavily into the sensing method. And here are just some sample projects and problems we are working on. On the upper left, we have FlatCam that was referenced earlier. It's a lensless camera wherein the function of the lens is performed by computational algorithm rather than the physical optics. And so we can have a camera without a physical lens, giving us a really thin imaging device. On the upper right, the goal is, suppose you have a camera and an object, and there's a wall in between the object that you want to image and the camera. Is there a way that we'll be able to see what the object behind the wall is? And here the signal is light that bounces around these corners of the walls. It bounces, hits the wall, interacts with the object, and then bounces back to the camera. And can we have a computational algorithm that extracts information of the object from this signal? On the bottom is my own project, privacy-preserving vision sensors. We are designing sensors that takes measurements of the scene, from which you can do some useful computer vision tasks, but from which does not contain sensitive information, such as face identity or image fidelity. Another computational sensing project we have is on pathogen identification. So suppose you have a sample and you want to identify what pathogens may be in it, for example, E. coli. The standard method is to design a specific probe for each type of pathogen. And the question here is, can we design a small number of probes that would work for a large number of pathogens, even those we may not have seen yet? And our approach here is to build a small number of random probes, so think random measurements, and then use ideas from compressive sensing and random measurements in order to identify pathogens, rather than needing specific probes for each type of pathogen. So that's what we have for sensing. And now to understand. A lot of us know that deep learning has gotten a lot of attention because of its success in various tasks, and our question is, can we get a better theoretical understanding, guarantees for deep learning, which becomes very important if we want to use it in some critical tasks such as self-driving cars. And our approach here is to leverage the observation that certain popular neural network architectures are themselves linear splines. And the operation they perform is a type of partitioning on the input space, wherein each partition is an affine map on the inputs in those input space. And from this type of observation, some classical DSP concepts such as vector quantization, matched filter banks just naturally appear. And these can give us some really good insights into developing a theoretical framework for deep learning taking us forward. Over in Mike Orchard's group, so this is not in Rich Baranyuk's group anymore, but Mike Orchard and his students are studying how to better understand image properties, especially edges, the locations of edges in images, as well as how different patches in an image are highly correlated with each other. So that's on the side of understanding. And now how can we better teach the world using signal processing and computational techniques? Usually in the educational setting, what you have is you have a collection of homework problems. And for each student, you assign these homework problems and you can know if a student answers each homework problem correctly or incorrectly. Now, a few years ago, in our lab, a system called SPARFA was developed, wherein you're able to group these homework problems into a small number of concepts. And from that, be also able to understand for each student which concept is the student good at and which concept does the student need improvement on. So this is sort of a knowledge profile for the student. And this sort of framework really opens up possibilities in personalized learning. And here are some of the projects we're working on in personalized learning. So instead of just a student knowledge profile in one point of time, on the upper left, can we develop student knowledge profile over time, sort of such as he or she takes a course. And on the bottom, once we know the knowledge profile of a student, for each student, can we come up with personalized action plans for that student? For example, maybe student A needs to read chapter 1, but student B needs to read chapter 2. Can we generate these in an automatic fashion? And on the upper right, one algorithm we have is an automatic question generator, an algorithm wherein you feed in textbooks, and the algorithm would learn the structure of the content of these textbooks and then automatically generate homework questions or test questions that you can then use. So to sense, to understand, and to teach, computational sensing, theory of deep learning, and personalized education. Just a little sample of the things we are doing right now. Thank you.
And now I'd like to introduce Amruta Pai.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Amruta. I'm a third-year grad student in the ECU department, and today I'm going to talk about the research group that I'm proudly part of, the Scalable Health Lab group. Our vision is to create the next generation of healthcare systems by understanding the relationship between behavior, biology, and health. We all know that behavior has a huge impact on the health, so we need technologies that can measure behavior and biology simultaneously to make an impact on health outcomes by providing relevant information to both patients and providers in a timely manner. So by bioimaging, we want to use camera systems which are low cost and portable to measure physiological signals at a cellular level. And one of the projects in this direction is Seeing Below the Skin, where we are leveraging the opportunity that light travels deep inside our body. It's non-ionizing and it's cheap to produce and control. But we face a huge barrier of scattering, that is, most photons that do pass through the skin surface get scattered. And with a penetration depth of 50 millimeters, we have a huge number of scattering events. So we end up with a large-scale inverse problem at low SNR. The current projects that are trying to address this barrier and leverage this opportunity in collaboration with teams at CMU, MIT, Harvard, and Cornell. One of the projects that's done here at Rice in this direction was imaging blood flow, where a recent alumni from our group, Dr. Mayank Kumar, created a technology called the PulseCam system, which is a multi-sensor modality that combines camera measurements with pulse oximeter measurements to provide a high-resolution perfusion map that tells us relative blood flow in different areas of the skin. This system was tested in a surgical setting and was found to work reliably, and one of the applications that came out was in detection of anesthesia administration. But this is just one application, and we're exploring various other applications in different domains. Now let's talk about the other big part of the Scalable Health projects, which is biobehavior sensing. Can we quantitatively measure human behavior? The opportunity is that human behavior has a huge impact on health. And if we can model biobehavioral pathways at an individual level, we can make personalized clinical interventions, which can give us improvement in healthcare outcomes. But how do we measure something abstract like human behavior in digital data terms? What sort of sensors do we use, and do we use existing sensors to measure the context of this behavior and confounders to account for them in our model? We're looking at various behavior projects in trying to understand different aspects of behavior in collaboration with institutes at the Texas Medical Center, like the Baylor College of Medicine. One of such projects is measuring social flow, where Jian Kao, a graduate student of our lab, created an in-person social network algorithm that measures real-life, in-person, conversational social interactions by using audio data and extracting fine-scale features from it, like the number and frequency of conversational partners, the turn-taking behavior during these conversations, and created an in-person social network as illustrated in the figure. And when this algorithm was used with the data collected over a 7-day study at BCM from 10 healthy, 10 depression, and 10 psychosis participants, we found that the network for a control or healthy participant was very different from that which we would find for a depression participant, which we intuitively already know, but now we can quantitatively measure it. So these are just a few projects that we're doing here at the Scalable Health Group, and we are doing a whole spectrum of other projects trying to address different clinical needs and challenges. For more information, please visit our website. sh.rice.edu. And we have a huge team, and we're always looking for collaborations to work on this cool, interesting ideas. Please feel free to talk to the PIs and students to learn more about ongoing and future projects. Thank you.
Now I'd like to introduce Chance Tarver.
I'm keeping my own time so I can try to get it on the leaderboard. So in the next 4.5 minutes, I'm going to try to give a crash course on DSP for next generation wireless systems. So where are we going? What we plan to see in 5G is not just faster broadband for our phones, but more connectivity. And so we'll have devices that are connected to the internet and all this data going up to the cloud. And so we'll have large sensor networks, Internet of Things, and even we can have devices in our bodies that are doing sensing of your vital signs. And of course, mobile broadband of over 100 gigabits per second. But one problem is there's a finite amount of spectrum. So many of you have seen this. This is an FCC band plan, and it's pretty crowded. So where do we put all of these devices? So we have all of these challenges. We have increasing densification with more devices, increased spectrum congestion, and to be able to do any of this ultra-wideband signaling, we have new waveforms that are stressing the physical layer. And so to enable all of this, we have to look at new spectrum resources like millimeter wave and terahertz wave, and we have to use new technologies such as massive MIMO. And to help assist with the ultra-wideband, we have to help the physical layer by using predistortion. So our unique approach is trying to do a synergy across all of these domains. And so we look at the algorithm side of things, but that algorithm insight informs how we create the architecture and vice versa. And then at Rice, we actually implement many of these ideas in actual test beds. So one example of this is multi-user MIMO. So with MIMO, what we do is we have hundreds of base station antennas simultaneously transmitting to tens of users. There's a problem with this, though. If I have hundreds of antennas, all of a sudden, I can have over 180 gigabits per second going into a central processor. And so there's no way that I can get all of this data in. And so something unique about our group compared to many others is we don't just look at the theoretical aspects of this. We look at how can we actually implement this. And so my colleague, Kaipeng Li, actually defended this work last week, I think, where instead of doing the centralized processing, we break it up into multiple antenna clusters, each working on a partial problem. And so by doing this, we can alleviate the bottlenecks in the interconnection, and we get a more scalable system with only minor losses to performance. We're able to implement many of these ideas. So at Rice, we have a power project, Platform for Advanced Wireless Research, called ReNew. And so ReNew is a reconfigurable ecosystem for next-generation end-to-end wireless. And so this is a next step on the massive MIMO work that has been done here at Rice. And so with this, we are collaborating with more than 28 private sector companies from US wireless industry to be able to test new ideas in actual hardware. And Rice has a long history of this, going back all the way to the warp board. And so the warp board was originally developed at Rice, and on that, massive MIMO systems were built, and now multiple startups have spun out, and we are creating a next-generation massive MIMO array. Well, if I have hundreds of antennas, I'm going to have hundreds of problems in the nonlinearities of these power amplifiers. And so power amplifiers are devices that, if I give it a small signal, it's going to amplify that signal into something bigger. Ideally, we'd like to see that just be a linear gain, but that's not really the case. And so we'd like to see something like this where the output power is growing linearly with the input power, but it'll start to saturate, and that nonlinearity will cause problems. And so if I'm trying to transmit maybe 10 megahertz LTE signal, after it goes through the nonlinearity of the power amplifier, I get the spectral regrowth around the main carrier. And so this is bad for coexistence, and it's not allowed by the FCC. So through digital predistortion, we can on the fly, learn the unique nonlinearities of a power amplifier and predistort so that the cascade of our DPD and the power amplifier is linear. And so we're looking now in how do we expand this to systems with hundreds of power amplifiers for massive MIMO? How do we use this in systems where we have ultra-wide bandwidths, like in 5G, where maybe we have 100 megahertz downlink signals? And we're looking at how to use this to improve coexistence among devices. And so after we apply DPD, we can see that we have much reduced adjacent channel leakage ratio. And so all of this work is done with many partners, Christoph Studer at Cornell, Kai Peng, and Joe Cavallero. The Power and Renew testbed is a large project that involves Lin Zhang, Edward Knightley, Ashu Cyberwall. And all of this is helping us to enable this massive device-device connectivity and the unique approach at Rice of co-design between the DSP side of things, the architecture, and the testbed makes us very well suited to these sort of wireless problems. Thank you.
Not top of the leaderboard. Closest to the target. Closest to the target. 1 second off.
Wow. So now I'd like to introduce Sudha Yelapantula.
There are a lot of professors who work in neural signal processing at Rice. I am going to focus on the work we do in Behnam Aazhang's group. The brain is an incredibly complex system with billions of neurons and connections. Unfortunately, so many people suffer from neurological disorders due to injury and disease. We analyze neural data to make inferences about the brain function underlying these disorders. We obtain data when patients go in for diagnostics from many common recording modalities like functional MRI, scalp EEG, and intracranial ECOG, that is electrodes inside the brain. And in our group, we obtain neural data from various recording modalities. Could be discrete spike data or continuous ECOG data. And then we perform various signal processing techniques on them with a goal to have inference on our brain function and to gain more insight into the underlying disorders. So as an example, I'm going to talk about 3 research projects that we are doing in our lab in the area of understanding human language, epilepsy, and understanding the olfactory system. So in the project of human language, we want to understand the connectivity patterns of information flow in human language because millions of people suffer from language disorders like aphasia, and many of them have no hope of recovery. And we need to understand the system before we can ever fix it. So we obtain data in a collaboration with a neurosurgeon who implants electrodes inside human brains. And from this day, and while the patient is in the surgery waiting for their seizure to be localized, they perform language tasks like a picture naming task. From this data, using techniques from information theory and graph theory, we found that we were able to obtain spatial temporal dynamics of information flow within the task. We were also able to identify strong relationships between the neural power responses that we observe and the underlying connectivity patterns. These kind of inferences can help develop better cognitive theories of language that can eventually lead to better treatment plans for people with aphasia. We also study the problem of epileptic seizures. So in the same patients that have these electrodes, we now collect data during seizures, and the surgeon normally localizes the seizure so they can cut out the correct brain region to improve the seizure outcome. So using this data, we were able to spatially isolate the seizure zone using directed information with clinical level accuracy. And we also we are in the process of temporally characterizing their dynamics using a dynamical mode decomposition. We would like to predict the seizure before it occurs so we can even prevent its occurrence. The third problem we are looking at is understanding the olfactory system in rodents, which is very similar to the olfactory system in humans. And the reason this is important is a lot of Alzheimer's patients suffer from a loss in their sense of smell. So these big blobs that you see, that's part of our olfactory system called glomeruli. And when a new odor comes in, these glomeruli have a different response to the smell. So you can think of this as a coding problem. And this is actually raw data where we use calcium imaging on the mouse. And this is done by Joe Young in our group. And you can see that the intensity of the glomeruli corresponds to the intensity of the signal. And given this set of responses, Joe was able to identify the profile of every odor in terms of what kind of code it has. And this project has just started. So given this kind of information, we now can try to understand if this olfactory system were to break, how would the system function? And then we have more insight into the olfactory system. So this is an example of some of the research projects that we do in our lab. And I would like to acknowledge our group. And that is our group with a Photoshopped member in it. Thank you.
So now, thank you. That was really interesting. Now I'd like to have Yu-Ching Wu talk to us about computational imaging.
Hello, everyone. I'm Yi-Cheng Wu from Rice Computational Imaging Lab, working with Aazhang. Today, I will briefly talk about what we are working on in our group. So for traditional imaging systems, camera is designed to directly capture physical world and convert it to be image. While for computational imaging, we are trying to do the joint design with the camera and the signal processing to acquire signal that is impossible for traditional ways. So here I will give you several examples. So no one would doubt that a microscope should contain at least one or more lenses to make it work. It is true because lens is the key part to focus light. However, current stage, if you want to image a brain with a microscope, you need a such huge microscope system. So the reason is actually limited by the physical law, saying that the working distance of a lens system has to be larger than the focal length. So lens is actually the key limit here. So in our group, the key innovation is to replace the lens system by a very thin mask that can be directly attached to the sensor. Although the capture image looks blurry, it is optimized such that the algorithm is able to recover the field correctly. So this is our flash scope prototype. So it is super thin and super light with only 2-micron resolution. So here, with the raw recording image, we're able to see the moving hydra in real time. So in the future, we hope to put this small, tiny device into the brain that can be very useful. So when you're driving through fogs, all the information from far away got lost. The reason is that when the image going to the sensor, it is the scattering media will block a lot of light. But a key innovation here is that we know that scattering effect is still linear if we think light as a complex field. Unfortunately, current CMOS sensor can only capture the intensity while losing the phase information. So we want to use phase retrieval algorithm to recover it. So here is our prototype. We name it WISH. It contains a spatial light modulator, a sensor, and a processor. By stacking multiple measurements correctly, we are able to recover the complex view back using the phase retrieval algorithms. It offers 12 megapixel spatial resolution, which is 1,000 better than the conventional image sensors. And even though nothing can be seen from the raw image, we're able to recover the unknown things experimentally. So it's easy to hear people around the corner, but it's very hard to see the person around the corner. The reason is that the wavelength of the sound is at the same order of the wall so that sound can diffract. But the wavelength of the light is so small that light just gets scattered. Is this still possible to look around corner? So we noticed that the spatial even though the spatial resolution is destroyed, the time of flight information is still preserved. For example, if we shine a laser on the wall, most of the light will going back to the sensor directly. But there are still small amount of light going to the object and collected by the sensor. These two types of photons have very different path lengths. So if we can reject all the early reaching photons, we're able to see around the corner. So we built our optical system with pulse laser and a SPAD-6 sensor. And with our reconstruction algorithms, we're able to see a lot of things around the corner. And it could be used for navigation system and medical imaging. So overall, our computational imaging group are combining the camera and the signal processing together that to make many impossible tasks to be possible. Thank you.
So now I'd like to introduce Ubli Mitra from USC, who's going to talk to us about the TI Visiting Professor Program. Ubli.
I wanted to thank Gene, I don't know where he is, for doing most of my talk. So there is actually not much that I need to share with you. But let me tell you a little bit about it and share with you a little bit my experiences here at Rice, which were actually extremely formative. So as has already been covered, this was a very generous gift that has funded a number of projects and investments at Rice. And I think it's safe to say that the department and Rice DSP has not been the same since. So it has really benefited from these investments. In particular, the fact that there have been over 150 of these TI fellowships given to graduate students. And of course,
anyone who's had a TI fellowship, you just stand up.
So I personally benefited from the TI Visiting Professor Program, and I wanted to share with you the other colleagues that have also benefited from this, those in the past. I think Sally is with us. I don't know if anyone else here is here, except, of course, Ying Yan, who joined Rice after being a TI Visiting Professorship. So for all future TI Visiting Professorships, be careful, there might be a target on your back. I was part of the earlier generation before there was a distinction between junior and senior, and here too you can see that Mike Orchard is a former TI Visiting faculty member. So I've now had the equivalent of what feels like 4 sabbaticals. Rice was my first. It truly set the bar in terms of experience that I had in a positive way. For those of you who are perhaps not originally from Texas, I think one thing for me as a native Californian was to come here and recognize what an incredibly gracious institution and gracious colleagues that I had at Rice. It was very welcoming. I was included in a number of events. In fact, I have yet to attend a dinner at the USC president's home, but I got to go to one at the Rice president's home and met a lot of interesting faculty there. One of the things that was beautiful about this experience and having the funding is that this was also the first and last sabbatical where I didn't have to work hard to get funding. And that really freed myself up to do a lot of different things, including, and Jean, I apologize, if I was supposed to write you a report, I never did. So that was a burden that was not present. I think it was also, in terms of research, the most productive sabbatical that I had. It really seeded my research at the time in sensor networks. I had papers with Rob Nowak and Becca Willett, who was a grad student at the time, as well as Ashutosh Sabharwal. And I like to take a little bit of credit for Ashu being here and being so successful, because he was a graduate student at Ohio State, which is where I started, and we wrote papers together. And I think I can tell this story without embarrassing Benham, but I really twisted his arm. He was skeptical about whether this Ashu kid was any good at all, and I said, no, I'm quite confident. I think he's really distinguished himself. I feel very proud of the interaction that I've had with him. So one of the comments that was made earlier was how Rice is a family, and it is very true, because I have to say I came here and I felt I was immediately adopted into a family. I already had Benham, who was my academic big brother, and I acquired quite a few other brothers You can imagine what it must be like to be the lone sister in a sea of brothers. So now I had many more people to beat on me and make fun of me, but they also challenged me incredibly, and I think my research truly benefited from it. So I avoided all things sparse and compressed prior to coming to Rice. I denied it for a while, but I have now since drunk the Kool-Aid, and I do work in this particular area. In fact, I've become much more of a signal processing person since my time at Rice. Sorry, Benham, but I think we all have at this point. And so let me close before I give the final slide by saying another sort of formative event that happened with me here is that I started to think about how you could use communication strategies in different ways. And I have this very distinct memory of having a conversation with Rob when he was faculty here and saying, you know, I really want to do something in the biological arena. And when I had shared this thought with other colleagues at other places, they told me I was a little crazy, this was not a good idea. But I listened to Rob's advice, I persisted, and I'm very excited, you're the first audience that I've told this in a non-embargoed way, that I and colleagues are a recipient of an Army Research Office MIRI, which is on the application of electrical engineering types of ideas to microbial communities. And so I was very excited about this. It's in a way started here. I'm not obviously as talented as the other Rice faculty because it obviously took me 17 years to make it happen. But and Al Hero, another signal processing person, is also on the team. So this had a profound impact on me, and I'm very grateful to the resources that TI provided. And every other sabbatical has not been able to quite achieve the level of the Rice sabbatical, both in terms of support or in terms of the family environment that I was able to experience. So before I leave, I want to leave you with one thought. This is Rich's thought, but let me also note that my father's also a signal processing person of some note, or I should say he is of some note, and I follow in his footsteps. And he's very sad that he can't make it here today. And I'm sad to miss him because my first conference was with him at ICASP. But there's one feature of him not being here for which I'm grateful, which is that there has been an alarming number of photographs in which I'm in with an alcoholic drink in my hand. So just between us, please don't tell him, okay? Thank you.
So Benham is going to talk to us a little bit about the big initiatives that are happening on campus.
Thank you. This timer will have no remorse on you, man.
How much time do I have? All right. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Aazhang. I don't have curly hair. I don't know where he got that picture from. This is how I was at Rice 30 years ago. And I'm here today to step back from DSP and talk a little bit about the department. Rice ECE has been, in terms of number of faculty, has been hovering about 18 to 20 for the last 50 years. And every year, almost, we go to the dean and the provost and beg them to give us resources to hire more faculty because we are so good, the family and all these other things. And every year, the answer has been no. Enjoy who you have, no more. And till after so many years, we learned our lesson that instead of going to the administration to ask for faculty that look like us, we should ask them to invest in an area. And a few years ago, several of our colleagues went to the administration and asked them to invest in data science. And for some reason, they agreed, and they gave Rice and our School of Engineering and the whole university, actually, like 8 faculty positions to hire in that space. And that's how we were able to bring in Santiago, who's not here. Oh, he's here. And Akane, and these are the 2 great, and Tassos, and Reinhardt, and we were able to increase the size of our faculty by a couple. And then that was like, whoa, that was nice. And then a few years later, we went back to the administration and tried to convince them to invest in neuroscience and neuroengineering. And didn't go anywhere. And one day I got a phone call from the president saying that he wants to meet me. And I go home and I tell my wife, can I tell the story? Yeah. Too late now. I went home and I told my wife that the president called me and he wants to see me. And she's like, why is he seeing you? I'm like, I don't know. She's like, did you ask why he wants to see you? I'm like, no, not really. She's like, what if he wants to fire you? I'm like, I think I have tenure, I'm safe. And anyway, I saw the president, and he sat down and he asked me on the spot, how much money does it take to build a neuroscience and engineering program at Rice? That is a good one, right? And I said, oh my God. I said 100 million. And I thought that was a good number, and better than 90 million. And then he went to his office, I came back to the office and all that. And then 6 months later, we learned that Rice is investing 50 million in neuroengineering. Therefore, well, no, wait. He cut the science part. And he gave us a discount of 50 million. Which, as engineers, we are delighted. We didn't like the scientists anyway. And now we have a neuroengineering initiative. And this year, and even this month, we are hiring 4 brand new faculty members. They've been on campus the last couple of months. And we are very hopeful that they may join us. Therefore, next year, we maybe see them on campus with us. And maybe in 50 years, we would have neuroengineering 50. And we are now thinking that this worked. We are getting some faculty, and now we are looking for other ideas of how we can go back to the administration and tell them that they should invest in quantum computing or some other big topic like that. Therefore, any suggestions is welcome. And with that, I'm done.
Can we give a round of applause to the students and faculty for how